So let's talk about some of the greatest warriors for Rostam the Allfather, with an overview of 10 of the strongest Space Wolf units in Warhammer 40k right now. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Wolves, and in this video doing an overview of some of their scariest threats that they can put in an army list. Space Wolves have certainly had a big surge in popularity recently. A pretty nicely done new model range tempted lots of people to collect the faction. And broadly speaking, since their codex came out, they've been a fairly well-balanced mid-tier kind of faction in Warhammer 40k, neither excessively strong nor excessively weak. At the last balance pass, they had a few nerfs to some choice units, but it doesn't really seem to have kept them down too hard. They've got tournament win rates of around 47%, maybe a tiny bit below the average power curve for 40k, but not by all that much. They're still winning around about half of the games that they take part in, even if they do tend to be one of the factions that you maybe don't see at the absolute tops of grand tournaments quite as regularly as some of the rest. Even if they might be a little bit harder to win a grand tournament with though, in the vast majority of Warhammer games they do absolutely fine. And for this video I thought to take a look in as to what competitive Space Wolf lists are choosing to put on the tabletop, doing an overview of 25 competitive lists that have done well at tournaments since the balance updates, and we'll organise a rough top 10 of datasheets by how frequently those units are selected in strong competitive armies. These ones are just looking at army lists that went 4-1 or better at grand tournaments, so basically the players using them did manage to do somewhat well. For the detachments being used for these ones, it does seem like the Saga of the Beast Slayer has dropped off a little bit recently. It initially seemed to have some good success from the codex, that does seem to have dropped down a touch despite a powerful core rule and some good stratagems as well. It does seem though that the majority of Space Wolf lists that are playing at the top levels of play have pivoted away to Stormlance or Gladius Task Force. Stormlance with its advance and charge and big reactive moves and things, and good support for Thunderwolves, and Gladius with a good mix, both a nice movement focused core rule, useful melee stratagems, and a few things for range as well. As ever, if you were looking to add more Space Wolves to your armies, or were picking up some 40k miniatures in general for the future, check out the affiliate discount links in the video description below. There's stores there around the world that save money versus Games Workshop, usually between 10 and 20%, and anything bought after clicking those links specifically helps to support Auspex Tactics, so a big thank you to any who choose to use those when you do order in some models. Getting into it though, and before the main top 10, let's do a few honourable mentions, both things that are notably not seeing any play right now, and things that were taken by a significant amount of lists but not quite making it into the top 10. Within Codex Space Wolves itself, the lesser played datasheets are Njal Stormcaller and Ulrich the Slayer, both characters that do have value but maybe a little bit less obvious to make use out of them, and a bit overshadowed by the ones that more directly help the units. The Grey Hunters are no surprise to see play less here as well, they just seem too costly for what they do currently. And otherwise all the Dreadnoughts beside Bjorn the Fellhanded cost a lot for their overall use, and the Wulfen that don't have Storm Shields are also lesser played as well. Otherwise 5 lists used either Land Raiders or Repulsors, solid enough options to deliver melee units and provide some fire support. And while any one gun tank wasn't necessarily super widely played, when taken as a class put together, 12 lists used at least 2 gun tanks, counting things like Vindicators, the Ballistus Dreadnought, the Gladiator Lancer, or others. And it feels like they're maybe a bit undervalued by this sort of ranking system, as you have a lot of similar units competing for the same role, and there's good arguments for each of them. Perhaps most relevant for the Space Wolves though, 4 use Iron Priests with a Gladiator Lancer. There's often 2 of those supported by 1 Iron Priest, giving them rapid fire so you have 1 extra nasty anti-tank gun. Then for units that saw a bit more play, somewhere between 5 and 8 lists use either Blood Claws, the Wolfguard Battle Leader, Wolf Priest, Infiltrators, or Fenrisian Wolves, so we'll drop in on those quickly before going into the top 10. Blood Claws maybe feel like they've had a small decline in play recently, 135 points for 10 of them, kind of rarely seen in 20s though, given that Games Workshop bumped the cost on them. They've got lots of objectives, move fairly fast and advance and charge. They can often do that anyway if you're playing Stormlance for example, and then just have buckets of damage 1 attacks and really quite a lot of cheap marine bodies. Typically when they get play it's usually 10 of them with Ragnar Blackmane, giving you an overall not super high investment unit to scrap for the midboard and hit enemy infantry hard. That's also not going to be too trivial to take down due to the amount of bodies that they have. Speaking of which, Ragnar Blackmane was fielded in 6 lists. It looked like in 5 of those he was with the Blood Claws and then 1 with Wolfguard Headtakers. Ragnar really does seem to have dropped off quite a bit in play rates, given the small points increase that he got, even with his really quite powerful melee damage. Really quite a brutal 10 attacks at strength 6, AP 3 and damage 2 on the charge, all with sustained hits 1, and when he's with Blood Claws you get to reroll wound rolls. Absolutely monstrous for his own attack damage, never mind all the wounds the rest of the squad is going to stack as well. Between the 2 of them they're a pretty serious melee threat, though it seems that for on the board melee threats people seem to be more convinced by either Wulfen, Headtakers or Terminators at the moment. In 7 out of the 25 army lists we have the Primaris Infiltrators, fairly good in whatever Space Marine list that you go for, 100 points for 5 of them. They've got their Deny Deep Strike at 12 inches, so can hold the home field, and if the opponent doesn't have significant reserves, they can infiltrate instead. Usually it's just the 1 unit of 5 of them. They don't do much damage, but can be helpful for winning the game overall via objectives, and are a little harder to take out than most given they feel no pain. Also on 7 selections out of the 25 army list, we have both the Wolf Priest and the Wolfguard Battle Leader, which rather feel like they're competing for the role of a leader unit, particularly for Wolfguard Headtakers, and some people prefer the Battle Leader, some prefer the Wolf Priest. They both have fairly good advantages. The Wolfguard Battle Leader just has some pretty solid stats for a cheap fighty character at 65 points, 5 wounds with an invulnerable save, 6 if you take the Storm Shield. He's got quite a good number of attacks, and both the hammer and the Mastercrafted power weapon can be okay. Maybe the higher strength one a bit more tempting if you don't have Saga of the Beast Slayer on the go. And he buffs his unit with a good amount of damage, sustained hits 1 and re-rolling hit rolls of 1 at the same time, and the chance to fight on death as well. It's well worth it for a tooled up squad of Wolfguard Headtakers if you want to hit extra hard, and could be a good choice to lead the Wulfen with the enhancement in the Beast Slayer detachment. I said the Wolf Priest feels like he's competing for a similar sort of role, a little bit less at melee damage given the AP 1, but it gives you +1 to the wound roll when you're on melee, and also the chance to revive slain models, which is quite big, particularly if the opponent doesn't manage to fully wipe out a Headtaker unit. You could bounce back in quite a big way. Between this guy and the Battle Leader, they both feel like they're fighting for a similar sort of role. It felt like quite a few lists that were taking either one or the other in a 6-strong Headtaker unit, but not necessarily having room in the army for both of them. Then finally, before we get into the top 10 proper, we have the Fenrisian Wolves. They had 8 selections out of the 25 army lists, and basically for 40 points give you a cheap unit of chaff, moving fairly fast, having a little bit of anti-light infantry style damage, and if they can hang out near characters, they even have a bit of OC as well, so it could potentially be quite a nice trading unit and a screening one. They get a reactive move of d6 inches as well, which can be handy and disruptive enough if you can roll high. They're nice enough to have as an expendable utility unit, though typically you wouldn't want to go too heavy. There's maybe a bit of competition between them and small units in Wolfguard Headtaker units. Before we get into the top 10 proper though, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor, In Great Eye Studio, and their Primal Hound upgrade parts. These ones are aimed to give a little bit of Space Viking theme to more bland and plain power armor style miniatures, and are aimed to be compatible with some of the more standard issue Primaris Marines to give them a bit more flavour. They've had a core range of a bunch of parts that have been fairly popular and around for quite some time at this point. Recently though, they've put out an expansion pack, which is sold as a bits pack for $35 from either My Manufacturer or Cults 3D, so you get the STL files for 3D printing, and with this code they also have an additional 20% off. For their offerings, they've got some hero accessories that I believe are the right sort of size to work with Terminator armour, including a rather nice Wolfie standard, various Wolf Priest Shaman kind of staffs, plus hammers and power fists. There's a selection of Thon chainswords and two-handed weapons, and other accessories such as crows, various fancy pistols for your ice weapon needs, and some big two-handed hammers and things. Here's a few miniatures assembled with the bits used as upgrades to existing miniatures. They do of course have the entire big Primal Hounds range as well. That one's usually around about $80 or local equivalent from the STL downloads. Out of those ones I particularly enjoyed their Ancient Armour kit. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring the video. You can check them out in the video description if you'd like to take a look over their range. Honourable mentions and other interesting units aside, let's get into the top 10 units by player selection for these top placing army lists. And first up we have the Wulfen with Storm Shields, 100 points for 5 of them or 200 for 10. These devolved Space Wolves fall into their genetic flaws for taking in around about half of lists, and for your 100 points you get a unit that moves 9 inches, so really quite rapid to get up the board, particularly if you have advance and charge from a detachment rule. Still aren't necessarily a pushover to take down, with 2 wounds at toughness 6 and a 4+ invulnerable save, and then have an interesting damage profile between them, 2 attacks with their hammers at strength 5 and damage 3, but they get anti-monster and anti-vehicle 3+, so pretty good at taking down enemy heavy hitters, and they're still going to be a good threat against infantry units as well. They can have a death totem to allow you to re-roll hit rolls of 1, that generally tends to be the thing chosen over the Stormfrag launchers, at least if you don't have a unit being joined by a Wolfguard Battle Leader who would give you the reroll ones to hit anyway. Overall still seems that they're seen to be solid damage for the points cost. People both use them in squads of 5s and 10s, though it might be a bit more tempting if you can coordinate with a special character in another unit, as if you're not close to one of those, the Curse of the Wulfen makes them OC 0. That clearly doesn't seem to be enough to dissuade people from them though, given the big impact that they can have against enemy tough stuff. Next up, in 9th place we have the Scout Squad. At time of recording we're still waiting for the Wolf Scout datasheet to show up. Hopefully that'll be interesting with all our fun specialists. The regular Scout Squad is still a staple for the Space Wolves, as it is for most Marines. A cheap and expendable 70-point unit that can infiltrate into the mid-board. And for the points cost in that battlefield role isn't too terrible on the damage or defensive side of things. People take a very wide variety of gear with them. Combat knives are nice enough, though the guns are fine as well. Almost everyone takes the chainsword, and at least one of the two heavy weapons, though is divided on whether the missile launcher or heavy bolter is preferable, and the snipers rather take or leave. Their main value isn't their damage output though, just to be a nice cheap unit to start in the mid-board and still have a bit of threat. They can do secondary objectives straight from the get-go. They can start on the primary objective to force the opponents to have to come out and take it, and potentially have an extra boost towards getting the jump on the enemy or hiding from them due to that scout move. The return to reserves can be pretty handy late game as well, to be able to jump around the board and maybe threaten the home field or do some secondary objectives. As ever with Space Marines, hard to go too far wrong with some scouts, and generally when they're taken it's either 1 or 2 units of 5 of them. Next up, in 8th place, we have the Wolfguard Headtakers. These are anywhere between 85 and 220 points, depending on the combination of the main guys in the unit and their accompanying hunting wolves. These guys are basically the Space Wolf Blade Guard equivalent, attacking with mastercrafted power weapons, with both the option to take paired ones for 6 attacks at strength 5 and damage 2, or go with a Storm Shield and get a 4+ invulnerable save on those 3 wound profiles at the expense of losing 2 attacks. They also get some heavy bolt pistols, and are allowed to select a quarry for devastating wounds against that target and precision. For how people are playing them, it's really quite mixed between the different loadouts. Lots of people take the paired weapons and just have them on full-on berserk mode, dealing loads of damage. Plenty take the shields for a bit more of a balanced unit that are harder to take out in return. And both smaller and larger squads can work well. If you take the smaller squad, you have the advantage that you can take the small and efficient unit of hunting wolves. Just 25 points for a unit to be a nuisance and do screening things on the board is genuinely quite helpful. Though if you take a bigger unit, they're a bit more justifiable to have a buffing character, often being joined by either a Wolfguard battle leader or a Wolf Priest. As mentioned earlier, they're both relatively well balanced and both get solid advantages against the right targets. Overall, currently there are popular units to include in Space Wolf army lists, being played in 14 out of the 25 ones that did well that I looked at. I certainly enjoy Advance and Charge from both Gladius and Stormlance, and maybe the Lance melee stratagem from Gladius potentially, and the damage buffs that Saga of the Beastslayer can give you. Next up, we've got the living legend himself that is Bjorn the Fellhanded. He's 170 points, and the Ancient Dreadnought seems to be in fairly near auto-include status for a bunch of competitive Space Wolf lists, 18 out of the 25 lists that did well seeming to include him. For the points cost, he starts out with some stratagem generation, just gaining 1 command point in your command phase, no questions asked while he's on the table, and that's really quite a big advantage to have going on as the game progresses. More stratagems mean more big swings, which can be particularly powerful for a melee army. That makes up a chunk of his points cost, and then beyond that he's just a big and threatening dreadnought. Only 8 wounds at toughness 9 is a bit less than most, but he gets a 5+ feel no pain to back that up, so in reality you'll have to chew through around about 12 wounds at that profile. And it's also not quite as easy to crack with anti-tank weapons as some, with a -1 to wound when he's attacked by things that are strength 10 or higher. For his war gear options, most people take the Hellfrost cannon, quite a nice torrent attack with strength 6 and damage 2, or 1 single big punch with damage 5. And otherwise he has 6 attacks in melee with True Claw, nice enough for dealing some damage to heavy hitters. It's strength 12, AP 2 and damage 3 with lethal hits and hitting on a 2+. Overall seems that people are willing to declare Bjorn worth it, the generated command points making up a good part of his value and maybe giving you a small incentive to play a little bit more conservatively with him in the early game before getting him stuck into the fight later on. Next up and placing in 6th place is the Combi Lieutenant. At this point we are getting into some seriously auto-include units though, and he was used in 80% of the army list, 20 out of the 25. I've talked about the Combi Weapon Lieutenant in a number of videos. It's just useful to have around as a screening and utility sort of unit. Being a lone operative means that you know that the opponent can't interact with him at long range, so it can be good to have loitering in the sort of mid to backfield. You're unlikely to catch up with him due to his fairly godly reactive move rule, which can have him fade behind some terrain, and even if you can get shots on him, he's not as much of a pushover as you might expect him to be, with stealth and a feel no pain. It's not going to do much damage against things that aren't 1 wound infantry, but that's not exactly the point for him. He can screen out areas of the board, do secondary objectives, and is fairly expendable at the 70 points if you do need to sacrifice him for points or tying up an enemy. And while he's alive, you can also get a damage buff against things on 1 marked objective as well, rerolling wound rolls of 1 against targets that might be in range of that. They're pretty excellent for just about any Space Marine army, though most lists choose to only include 1 of them normally. Beyond that, it's arguably a bit of diminishing returns. At a similar sort of play rate and also being taken in 20 army lists, we have Arjac Rockfist, the champion of the Wolfguard, fighting with a great big shield and foe hammer, his teleporting thunderhammer. Going up in points a bit at the last balance pass doesn't seem to have dissuaded from him anywhere near as much as Ragnar Blackmane. It still seems that Arjac either marching or teleporting into battle with squads of Wolfguard Terminators is really quite a common sight in lists. For the 105 points that he costs, you get a sturdy character with 6 wounds and Terminator armor. He can throw Foe Hammer in the shooting phase for a single ranged attack, and then hit hard in melee with it. 5 attacks at strength 8 and damage 3, with anti-monster and anti-vehicle 3+, and also precision. For his Wolfguard Terminator unit, he can have them hitting back at the enemy if they tried to jump on them in melee. He gives Fights on Death 4+ to the unit, which is actually quite a big deal against a good number of targets that might try and undo them in close combat. He also gets some big rerolls against character keyword units. Most commonly he tends to lead 5 Wolfguard Terminators, though some army lists choose to go for 10 of them. You could start them on the board, or potentially make use of Logan Grimnar's first turn deep strike, and that could be a very nice way to get them into a fairly threatening position on the board, maybe safe in cover in a midfield ruin. Next up and in 4th place here we have the Standard Space Marine Intercessors, 80 points for a squad of the Standard Space Marine battle line, and basically tend to be in fairly near auto-include status for their sticky objective style rule, allowing that to mark the home objective early on, giving you more flexible options from there. It means that you can be more flexible with your screening and not necessarily need to put too much weight on the objective, and late in the game if the opponent can't threaten it, you can potentially move up to the mid board and abandon it. Even beyond that, the squad's not really that bad for the cost though. You get 20 shots against horde style targets with their bolt rifles when they focus fire, and also have a grenade launcher and a power fist to maybe take a few chunks out of tougher stuff. If they do go trying to scrap for mid board objectives or holding the home field one, they have more OC than most. As a result, just about every Space Marine and Divergent chapter list often starts with a single 5-strong squad of these guys, though it's kind of rare to see people use more. Finally though, and tied for the top spot, we have 3 units from the Space Wolves Codex that are all in joint first, not just fairly auto-include for Space Wolf armies, but auto-include to an impressive extent, with only 2 lists choosing not to take each one of them. First up we have the old wolf himself in Logan Grimnar, 110 points for the chapter master of the Space Wolves, getting you a fighty character with 8 wounds, a bunch of damage 3 attacks in melee that you can sweep instead, and backed up by extra attacks from Tyrnak and Fenrir. He does feel a bit on the unusual side with his special rules relative to other chapter masters out there. First up he has a command point debuff nearby, increasing stratagems by 1 CP within 12 inches, a very useful ability to have within range of the mid-board objectives, and then also he allows you to arrive a unit from reserves in battle round 1 that doesn't necessarily need to be his own unit, and it doesn't necessarily need to be strategic reserves either anymore. Generally that's going to be most useful for putting down a big threatening squad of Wolfguard Terminators somewhere in the mid-board. It doesn't mean he'll reliably deliver them to melee, though if you think that they can be in a relatively safe place and a coin flip chance is worth it, they could attempt a 9-inch charge with a command point reroll, but otherwise just putting them somewhere threatening definitely has big value, particularly for a scary squad with Arjac Rockfist, or he could even use a big unit to wall the enemy in a bit. Between those 2 special rules and his stat line, quite clearly he has enough value to add to the army. Though as neither of his special rules necessarily enhance his squad all that much, he does have a bit of variability as to how he plays. Lots of lists just choose to run him completely solo. He's certainly threatening enough to be a danger to more medium-sized units in his own right, and that might allow him to position better for the command point debuff. It's definitely not a wrong choice to put him with a squad of Wolfguard Terminators though, and just make an overall very big threatening unit that can arrive early and have a bit more defense to put that command point debuff in the right place. Either way is hard to go wrong with, and scores joint first on this list as a result. Next up, we've talked about them a fair bit with their leader characters. The Wolfguard Terminators are also here on joint first. 23 out of 25 army lists took them, and quite a good variety as to how they were played. Maybe around 2 squads of 5 might be the most typical, though some lists use 1 or 2 blocks of 10, or just a single unit of 5. For your 170 points, you get a far more efficient Terminator squad than the core Codex ones. They'll typically take Storm Shields, so most of them have a 4 wound characteristic with a -1 to the wound roll from their Rugged Resilience special rule. That tips the balance from making Terminators a bit more trivial to take down to genuinely quite hard work. The standard ones get their mastercrafted power weapons for a bunch of damage 2 strength 5 attacks. The leader will take a relic great axe for devastating wounds and damage 3. And then you've got the option for one guy to take a power fist and assault cannon, and that very much seems to be a take or leave option versus the extra wound or the extra storm shield. Overall you get a powerful threatening unit. I'll certainly enjoy the advance and charge that both Gladius Task Force and Stormlance can get them, and any damage buffs that improve the wound roll such as Lance Melee really won't hurt either. As we've seen, it's really quite common to pair with Arjac Rockfist. The majority of lists take at least 1 squad with him in, and Logan Grimnar is often in the list to deliver them early as well, though it doesn't mean he always necessarily needs to join a unit of them himself. In any case, nice to see the faction elite Terminators being in pride of place. I feel like comparing these to the standard Loyalist Terminators does put into perspective why they should probably either do a bit more for their points cost or cost a bit less, as these guys are just quite clearly flatly better. Lastly, and for our third unit tied for the top spot, we have the Thunderwolf Cavalry. And interestingly enough, for a unit that got at least a fairly respectable points bump in the last balanced data slate, they really don't seem to have been taken any less whatsoever. The vast majority of armies taking them, and again having rather good variety as to how they're fielded. Some take sort of medium threat units of 3 of them, plenty go in for squads of 6 and sometimes multiple units. There's loads of variety, the majority of lists going somewhere between 6 and 15, though Stormlance Task Force perhaps understandably tends to take more. They do have some rather nice stratagems for mounted units. For effectively around about 38 points per model, you get a mounted Space Wolf unit that can move 12 inches, and for the points cost is fairly sturdy and hard to take out, with toughness 6, 4 wounds, and everyone takes these Storm Shields for the 4+ invulnerable save. Between the squad they'll put out really quite a serious amount of attacks, 21 attacks for each 3 Thunderwolves, the Wolf Guard weapons for the Riders being at Strength 5, AP 2 and Damage 2, so the sort of mastercrafted power weapon style profile. And then on the charge you get to add +1 to the damage characteristic of those, so the Wolf Guard weapons hit at damage 3, posing a lot more threat to things like Terminator equivalents and vehicles. The low strength still means that they might want any buffs that they can get, such as Saga of the Beastslayer ones or the Lance Stratagem in Gladius. Just in general though, they're well capable of bullying their equivalent sort of medium investment style units, can potentially do some big move blocks and Thunderwolf jail style tactics, and in Stormlance they have access to all the nice mounted stratagems. That -1 to hit and wound at range is a particularly nice one, and might mean that the opponents are going to seriously struggle to take down a 6 strong squad. Overall it still seems like Thunderwolves are the powerful shock elite of the Codex. That's about it for this one though. Let me know your thoughts as to the Space Wolf units down in the comments below. Which ones get the nod in your list and which ones are left behind. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on them and any other relevant tactics I might have missed. As mentioned earlier, a big thank you to the video sponsor in the Primal Hounds parts by Greytide Studio. If you want some all very wolfy style bits, then check out their range linked down in the video description. They've had that new upgrade pack go on sale recently with some fun bits for upgrading chunky power armor, a few cool bits like the Wolf Standard and hammers, and they have their core range available as well. And all a little cheaper with that Greytide X Auspex code. Thanks to them for this one and sponsoring a bit more Space Wolf content. That's about it for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out every day. If you've been enjoying the videos on the channel, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description down below. Channel patrons get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.